Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel at JohnTeacher. Today I'm going to be teaching us how to set up a FastAPI project as a complete beginner. So FastAPI is a modern high-performance framework for building APIs with Python 3.6 and above. But before we dive into setting up our environment and working, let me quickly talk about FastAPI and why it is a great choice for building APIs. So FastAPI is fast, as the word implies, FastAPI, and it's a very high performance framework inspired with Node.js and Go. FastAPI is designed to be easy to use and learn as a complete beginner. So FastAPI is based on the Python standard type hints. And finally, FastAPI supports the asynchronous, async and await programming concept, which is a modern feature of programming in Python. So without any further ado, let's dive into setting up our environment and getting started. So the first thing we are going to be checking right now is to make sure we have Python installed in our system. So I can do that by typing the command Python 3 version to know the version of Python we have and it is installed. So you can see I have Python 3.10 installed. So you need to make sure you have Python 3.6 at least installed on your system to be compatible with FastAPI. So we need to create our project directory where our project is going to be lying. So we use the command mkdir, then the name of our project folder. So I'll call this FastAPI project. So as you can see, we have our FastAPI project created. I'll use the command cd to go inside of that project we just created right now, inside of that folder we just created right now, the FastAPI project folder we just created right now. So you can see we have inside of our FastAPI project. So another thing, important thing you need to do, you need to know how to do and always do it because it's the best practice, is that you need to always create a virtual environment for your project. The virtual environment actually helps us to isolate our project dependencies from the rest of other dependencies installed on our system. So I'm going to go ahead right now to create a virtual environment with this command. So Python 3-m virtual environment, and then you give it the name of the virtual environment you want. It can be any name. So for me, I'm going to be using virtual venv as our virtual environment name. So let's wait as our virtual environment installs on our system. So we have virtual environment installed already. You can see the folder there, venv. So the next thing we want to do is we want to now activate this virtual environment so that when we install our dependencies, we know that it is isolated inside of this virtual environment. So to activate this virtual environment, we are going to use the command source virtual environment bin activate and then the name of our virtual environment. So you always want to use this command, and then after this command you specify the name you used in installing your virtual environment. In my case, I use venv as our virtual environment, as you can see here. So I'm going to call that venv to activate it. So you can see that we have this already showing here that our virtual environment is activated and is active. But I'm going to be working on this project using VS Code because it's easier to work on VS Code than working on the terminal. So I'm going to use the command code dot in this particular directory to open up our project on VS Code. So you can see we have our project opened on VS Code already. So what we are going to be doing right now is I'm going to make sure that our virtual environment is activated. So you can see here that our virtual environment is activated. I can still confirm. You can see that it is activated here. So we are good to go. So the first thing we want to do right now is to install our dependencies. So since we are working with FastAPI, we need two very important dependencies to start with. which is the Fast API itself, and then Uvicorn. So Uvicorn is actually used to run our Fast API during development or production. So I'm going to be installing Fast API as well as Uvicorn. So I'll use pip. So you need to make sure you have pip installed on your system as well. So I'm going to be doing pip install Fast API and then Uvicorn as well. So this is going to install Fast API as well as Uvicorn on our system. So let's wait while our dependencies have been installed on our system. So as you can see, we have our dependencies all installed without any errors. I'm going to clear our screen. And then when I use the command pip freeze, you see that I have our dependencies all here. All our installed dependencies are here. So we are good to go. So the first thing, another thing we want to do is we need to make sure that we have a requirement.txt file. So this requirement.txt file is actually a file that we are going to always move all our dependencies that are installed on our system, on our project into. So when we install any dependencies, we have to move that dependencies into our requirement.txt file. This will help us during deployment when we are trying to deploy in any server environment. We are going to be installing that requirement.txt file as the file that has all our dependencies. So it's always important to have a requirement.txt file. So I'm going to be creating a file here, requirements.txt. So, and then, like I said, I'm going to be moving all our dependencies into this file. So all I'll do is pip freeze, and then I'll pipe all the dependencies inside our virtual environment into the requirement.txt file. I think I made a mistake with the spelling. So it's supposed to be requirements requirements .txt. So as you can see, I have all our dependencies in our requirements.txt file here. So we're able to move all our dependencies into this requirement. It's just a good practice. So now that we have our virtual environment activated and our requirement.txt file installed, we need to now create our file, our project file. So I'm going to be creating a main.py, and then I'm going to be importing FastAPI from FastAPI. So from FastAPI, import FastAPI, and then I'm going to initialize this FastAPI we just imported. So I'm going to be creating two routes, which we are going to be using to be testing our project to see how far we have gone. So the first route is just going to be a root route. So to create a route or to create an API in FastAPI, all you need to do is to use the decorator at app. So the app we just initialized is what we are going to be using with the decorator at. And then since it's going to be a get request, we are going to be using .get, and this is going to be our root API. So I'm going to create a function here called home. All this function does is this function returns an object with a message, a simple message that says welcome to our first fast API project, and that's it. So let me create the second route. So that get, and this is going to, I'll give it a path users, and it's going to take in username as parameter. So this route is going to take in username as parameter. I think there's a typo error. So it's supposed to be at app, not at pp. And then in this particular endpoint, I'm going to be using the async. The async is actually a new programming concept that FastAPI has incorporated into FastAPI using the pedantic schema. So it helps us run our functions asynchronously. So it comes with the keyword async and then our function. So I'll call this function user. So all this function does is this function takes in a username, which is a string parameter or a string type, and then it returns a simple object, which is our message, and then our message, we're going to be using the f string. So I would say hello, welcome, and then I'll call that username to our project. So as simple as that. So these are just two basic endpoints. That the first one returns welcome to our first API project, and the second one takes in a parameter, which is a username, and then returns that username. So this is just a simple API to show you how easy and fast it is to set up a fast API project. So I'm going to be running this. I'm going to be running our project using Uvicorn. If you remember, we installed Uvicorn. So Uvicorn, and then I'm going to call our file, which is the main.py file here. So I'm going to be calling that file main, and then the app, which is this app we initialized, and then dash dash reload. So for the development server, it's always good to use the flag dash dash reload to help reload our server anytime we make any changes. So I'm going to run this. You can see that our fast API app is up and running. So all I need to do right now is to go ahead and copy this URL running on port 8000 localhost, and I'm going to paste it here. And when I do, you see that we have our welcome to our first fast API project. If I confirm to check our next API we created, which is the user and the username params, you see that when we do that, we add the user, and then we had, maybe I give it my name John. You see that we have hello, welcome John to our project. So if I change this John to Ofem, you see hello, welcome Ofem to our project. So this is how easy and simple it is to set up a fast API project from the get going. And then to break it to you, fast API has a very cool feature, which is the fast API documentation, the Swagger UI documentation. So all we need to do to access the fast API Swagger UI documentation is to go to our root URL, and then add the docs. So all we need to do is just to include docs and click on enter, and you see that we have our fast API already established here for us from fast API. thanks to Fast API for making things easier for us. So instead of using Postman or Insomnia to test our APIs, we have already an environment to test our API on the go. So as you can see already, it's already documented. We have our home route, we have our user route. So I can always test it here to see. So if I click on the execute, you see that we have our response status code 200 with the message, welcome to our first API. And then if I test the second one, I try it out, and then I provide it with a username. I'll call it Fidelis. You see that we have our status code response 200 with the message, hello, welcome Fidelis to our project. So this is how easy it is to actually set up a fast API project from the go. And that's it on today for creating a fast API project. We're able to cover creating a virtual environment, creating dependencies, installing our dependencies, and creating the requirement.txt file for housing our dependencies. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification button so that when we post any new videos, you actually get prompted for it. Thank you.